hope you've had a good lunch. And now we've got Eli and Owen from Leeds Autism Aim, who will be discussing autism and mental health. Over to you guys.
Thanks, Michael. So it's fair to say half an hour does not cover autism and mental health at all. So it might be a kind of brief overview rather than a really in-depth presentation. So I'm Owen. I am the AIM service manager. So that comprises of Leeds Autism Aim and Bradford and Craven Autism Aim. If you want to find out more, you can check out our stall. And Eli's going to be joining with me.
I am Eli. I just want to preface by saying that I am an unreliable speaker, so I might, if I struggle to speak, use my iPad to talk, but I'm going to try speaking for now. I am Eli. I am 27 years old and I work as a peer development worker for AIM's Mental Health Equity Project. I was diagnosed as being autistic at 11 years old. But school bullying and adverse childhood experiences and other bad situations had been a really significant trauma for me. However, this was not really recognised until later in life. My first experience of barriers to mental health access was when I was young. I was in and out of CAMS services and often felt like the professionals who spoke to my mother and I focused on how challenging my behaviour was to others. I was quite a difficult child, to be honest. Rather than the internal states of high anxiety and the distress of trauma, rather than struggling, overwhelmed and needing support, I was often viewed as difficult or angry. My meltdowns were viewed as temper, rather than me being so overwhelmed by the environment that I couldn't cope. Often the advice and support given was for other people and educational settings on how to deal with me, rather than support for me dealing with the world. As a teenager, I had my first experience of depression. It was quite bad. I became even more isolated. I struggled to leave the house. And it was a really difficult time for myself and my family. My mum was really worried and we went back to CAMS. Again, the focus was all on my behaviour and how difficult I was. At the time, I did not have the language to really describe what I was experiencing. I didn't know the word depression really existed. So I told the professionals that it felt like I was having an existential crisis, because that was a phrase I had heard in media, and I'd used it to describe intense states of sorrow about the life you were living. However, the fact that I used this language meant that my depression symptoms were kind of brushed off as me having an autistic special interest in philosophy, rather than having a serious mental health problem that was affecting my ability to make friends, my ability to be in education. This continued to be a pattern in my life until I became an adult and had less support from childhood services. The new life experiences and expectations I did not have the capacity for became all too prominent. Social situations became more complicated. There was expectations of work, new types of education. People were doing social things I didn't understand. I experienced significant crisis and also suicidality, as well as an increase in panic attacks, dissociation, and self-harm. In my adult years, I've been diagnosed with depression, anxiety disorder, and complex PTSD. However, just because I now had these diagnoses, and there was an explanation, I guess, for why I was struggling so much with my mental health, it didn't mean that access to support was now smooth sailing. I have been bounced around from service to service, and it's been very difficult, and I felt very unbalanced because of that. My NHS CBT therapist tried her best, but ultimately she recognised that I needed autistic-specific therapy, and the tools they used to measure recovery weren't working for me. She said, usually we discharge people when they get to this green part here, but you're never going to get to this green part, so okay. I was given a text number for the crisis team because I went to my GP and I said, I experience these crises, I get very overwhelmed, I feel suicidal, I hurt myself, I need help in these times, but I really struggle to speak. So I was given this text number and said, you text this and it should be okay. But then when I text this number, I was told I had to call first in order to make sure I was all registered on the system and everything. And every time I was in crisis, I tried texting and I would always get rejected. It was oftentimes impossible for me to speak during this time. At the best of times, speaking can be really difficult for me. I have situational mutism and I'm an unreliable speaker. This meant that I often escalated to the point of needing to go to A&E, where the sensory environment was unbearable and overwhelming. The lighting was a lot, there was a lot going on. I didn't know how long I was going to be there. It was unpredictable, and I oftentimes had meltdowns. I tried group therapy, and group DBT in particular, but my autistic ways of being and the adjustments I needed weren't accepted. They weren't, I guess, what was expected, and thus I had a hard time being able to access those groups. I was rejected from CMHT over 5 times, and often deemed too complex for less intensive services, like the mental wellbeing service. And this left me, as you can expect, in a bit of a limbo. I didn't know what to do or where to turn. The people who cared for me were overwhelmed as well and needed support. And it was a hard time for everybody. Recently, things have been a little bit better. The support I need from services isn't always there, but now I'm finally in CMHT and I see a psychologist who understands that communication isn't always easy for me, and I'm not always easy to understand. And after I applied for funding for autistic-specific therapy, which at the time was turned down. And because of that, I ended up having to self-fund that therapy, which means that I'm able to get access to therapy that works for me, but it shouldn't have to be this way. Autistic people should be able to access specific therapy for them that's adjusted to them through the NHS, because not everybody has the financial ability to be able to have access to self-funded therapy. Mental health will absolutely always be a struggle for me. Living life with how it is, like the world is complicated and trauma is ever existent, like that's always going to be hard. But I've learned better self-advocacy skills. I've learned things that have worked for me, such as writing down like what I'm struggling with before I go see somebody, so that way I don't have to say it and they can read it and they can understand that, or bringing somebody with me. It has become really important to me to share my lived experience with others and to fight for a better world where autistic people can get the help that they need, because at the moment it's hard and people aren't getting the help that they need. Being a peer development worker has allowed me to do that. The topics aren't always easy as someone who has been through it. It can be triggering at times, and I do need the support from my team, and help, and from my support worker as well. But I think it's absolutely important and vital to have autistic people support other autistic people. And I am proud of where I am at today and of the work that I do for the Mental Health Equity Project.
Thanks, Eli. So yeah, it's not rare for autistic people to experience what Eli's experienced. There's a few kind of studies, and one saying that 94% of autistic adults experience anxiety, with almost 2 in 3 having a clinical diagnosis of anxiety. 83% of autistic people reported depression, and they were 8 times as likely to experience feeling loneliness than the non-autistic population. And 76% of autistic adults did reach out for mental health support, similar to Eli's story, but only 14% of people felt that there were enough services in their area to meet their needs. Also, again, different studies say different things, but this another one saying that 8 in 10 autistic people will experience a mental health problem during their lifetime, and that compares to 1 in 4 people in the general population. So definitely both kind of like higher prevalence of mental health issues and less support, really. And obviously, a lot of what happens when you don't get the right support can often lead to suicidal ideation or people being likely to die of suicide. So autistic people being 7 times more likely. Yes.
I just want to add an extra statistic that suicide is I think it's the second highest cause of mortality for autistic people after epilepsy, and it's the highest in autistic people who do not have a learning disability.
Yeah, and there's also another study that talked to the parents and families and support networks of autistic people who had taken their own lives, and asked about kind of whether or not it was possible that they were autistic. And so this figure is probably higher than 7 times. So, yeah, 35% of autistic people have considered suicide, and 25% of autistic people have attempted suicide or have suicidal behaviours. So obviously mental health is quite kind of not just about mental health services. Often people's first port of call for their mental health is at their GP, and 80% of autistic people are likely to struggle visiting the GP due to access barriers. So again, another route that's kind of like more difficult for people to even ask for help. And we're going to talk more about sensory and communication issues, but they obviously span lots of different things. And so that can, like I say, limit attendance, not just at the GP, but at other services as well. And social care is a really important thing for autistic people, and is shockingly, shockingly bad, I'll say. Shockingly bad, I won't be reserved. But yeah, kind of like there are obviously autistic people who do get support from adult social care, but, there's lots of gaps in knowledge in adult social care, such as kind of in care act assessments and that kind of thing. So, things can be preventive. A lot of mental illness is situational. If these things aren't in place, if someone was to have a physical health issue, that can impact their mental health as well. So not being able to access your GP is definitely an issue. So there are a high percentage of autistic people in inpatient care. We know that through a project that's finished now, but we've done before, that being in an inpatient or an acute mental health ward, that can have a real negative impact on autistic people, rather than being the place where they might recover. Sometimes they can end up spending a far greater amount of time in those acute mental health wards. And, a lot of that is down to a lack of awareness around sensory communication needs. 58% of disabled inpatients on mental health wards are autistic. Autistic people experience higher rates of restraint on inpatient mental health wards. So if someone's having a meltdown, they might be restrained, which is obviously not appropriate in the majority of cases, yes.
As somebody who has been through restraint, sometimes a lot of people go for that as a first port of call for when somebody's going through a crisis or a meltdown, but oftentimes there are other approaches to this sort of situation before restraint and restrictive practice. Things like a low arousal approach, where you are sort of minimising the sensory environment and being aware of how you are as a person in that environment could be affecting and the person's situation. I think these are really important approaches to consider before any restraint. And if you are doing restraint, that should absolutely be trained and last resort.
Yeah, definitely. Also, when people are being discharged from acute mental health wards, that can be a huge change in routine and structure, and there's often not the right support there for people when they're being discharged back into the community. And again, we'll talk a lot about kind of communication, but again, like if people are trying to kind of build a care plan outside of hospital, then kind of communication plans that might have been done in hospital and being translated, or kind of that information should be on the system. I'll go on to what is happening in a positive way later on, but isn't always there. And yeah, kind of like people again, like were being kind of admitted to hospitals outside their areas, so their support networks weren't easily able to visit them. And when they're kind of visiting day services and that kind of thing, their needs aren't being met there. There is some recent guidance and strategies from NHS England, which is a really positive thing to have that in one place. So it's called Meeting the Needs of Autistic People in Mental Health Services. There are many barriers, but we'll just go through some of the kind of main barriers that are identified. So they can be categorised into service-related factors, healthcare professional-related factors, and individual-related factors. So just talk about the service-related factors. So again, we've talked about kind of inadequate adult services. It's quite common for people's knowledge or for services to look at autistic children. We know a lot of the kind of can't think of the word, things that are used for autistic adults. Sorry, yeah.
I'd also add that a lot of services that are out there for autistic adults tend to be catered towards the needs of autistic people with higher support needs or who have a co-occurring learning disability. So a lot of autistic people who don't have a learning disability or have lower support needs, there aren't many services out there, especially not funded services.
Thanks, yeah. Rejection of referrals. So a lot of autistic people have said that they've just rejected solely due to their autism diagnosis, whether or not this is a service saying we don't understand autism, we don't know how to adapt therapies for you, or saying, well, actually, we think your issues are with your autistic traits and you should go and seek peer support, when often, it's both things together and they're intertwined. The complex access processes, I can attest to this, like trying to understand how mental health services work, where you go. There are numerous steps involved and kind of inflexible service models. So that can really deter people. It can be really overloading and confusing, and it's easy, especially when you've got a mental health issue, to give up trying. Communication barriers. So like Eli was saying, like a lot of services rely on phone communication, even more so after the pandemic, when actually that should have opened up kind of more communication options for people. So that can really create a significant barrier. Like Eli said, if you're in crisis and you're unable to talk or you're unable to articulate yourself, that's a really critical time when you need support, and there's a massive barrier there. a lack of proactive reasonable adjustments. Again, there's some work being done on this, but kind of like, being asked about your reasonable adjustments or kind of being proactively offered, or services putting like things in place where people don't have to ask for reasonable adjustments is really important. And so people withdraw, from those services are maybe deemed to not engage when they've really, really tried extra hard to engage. Yeah.
I was one of those people who was sort of deemed as not engaging in services, and being quite disengaged. And a lot of that came down to the complication of how setting up appointments was, and communication, my communication not being as easy to understand. And one of the things that led to things being better was when I mentioned earlier with the psychologist who understood my communication, I dropped off communication for about 4 or 5 months, and I managed to get back in contact after I was struggling for that period, and we resumed support rather than it being discharged, wait again, start again, do the whole process. And I think it's the flexibility like that and understanding that sometimes someone might not necessarily be as reliable as the systems kind of want them to be, and that this doesn't mean that they shouldn't have access to care and support.
Definitely, and I think some of the things are quite basic, really, and a lot of it is about the fear of the unknown for services, so a lack of understanding and training. So we know that kind of there's a lack of training and knowledge within mental health services. Not to say that there isn't any, there definitely is, but there's a lack of kind of training in general. And we talked again about communication preferences. So that is quite complex. It's not just about kind of your communication preferences in terms of using the phone or meeting in person or that kind of thing. It can be how questions are structured, or like Eli was saying, scales are used and that kind of thing. Negative past experiences, we've covered a lot of the negative past experiences already, but yeah, that can mean that people don't approach services, they don't try again, and that can lead to some of the things we mentioned earlier. Yeah.
I typically refer to this as being sort of institutional trauma. For a lot of people, especially people who have had childhood diagnoses and have gone through lots of different therapies, some of which may be traumatic, they may have that sort of difficulty with engaging with services. And also people who are late diagnosed and have been through the mental health system and been misdiagnosed and misunderstood, they might have that sort of that trauma from those experiences with professionals who weren't understanding them. And it's not personal when this happens. A lot of the time it's just that these experiences have happened.
So yeah, alexithymia as well, can be a real issue for people. I probably said that wrong, but recognising people recognising their own emotions and being able to describe them can be a real hindrance to them accessing mental health services. So sensory overwhelm, like the places that people might receive therapy, where they have their assessments, they can often cause sensory overwhelm. I think Eli mentioned that earlier about having meltdowns when seeking support, and obviously you kind of know you're not making those steps forward if that's the case. Intersectionality as well. So we know that factors like gender, race and sexuality can create barriers for anybody, but often autistic people face these kind of other barriers on top of being autistic. So what needs to change? Lots of things. I think we've gone for 4 things here, but offering reasonable adjustments, improving communication methods, providing training for healthcare professionals, and adapted therapies for autistic people. So fingers crossed, soon there will be an NHS England guide to adapting therapies. Yes, Eva.
And just an add-on that I think that systems for people like applying for services and things just need to be streamlined and have lots of different ways of doing that, because I think that could be a massive barrier to people.
Yeah, definitely. So positively, there is quite a lot going on now in Leeds that's working towards some of those things we just mentioned and addressing some of the issues that we mentioned. So I'm going to attempt this title of this steering group, the Transforming Community Mental Health for Neurodivergent People steering group. I know that was the easy one. And that's made up of Leeds and York Partnership Foundation Trust, Leeds City Council, AIM, and Health for All. There's the ICB, Integrated Care Board, Dynamic Support Register. We've got a stall here today, and Andy, I changed that slide for you, Andy. So, the Leeds Autism Diagnostic Services have got a consultancy, so for people who are on the books of the Community Mental Health team, can ask for some consultancy. Leeds Autism Diagnostic Service are also doing training for mental health professionals. This is the one, improving care for people with a learning disability and/or autism within mental health services steering group. Is also another one. Yes, Eli.
There's also us. We're cool.
I'm going with it. We've got some slides about us, Eli. Don't worry. There's some Autism Champions, which are a fairly new thing, but going really well within LYPFT. AIM and LYPFT and Bradford NHS Trust, I can't remember the name of it, did some sensory audits and improvements to the Beckland Centres Ward 1 and 3 and Ascot House and Ascot Croft, and those recommendations are being put into place now. There's, again, here today, the Neurodiversity Information Hub, which is for children and young adults. There's the Night Owls Helpline Service, which again is for children and young adults. Mind, we've done a bit of work with Mind to help them set up some workshops called Open Minds, check them out. And Health for All have got a neurodivergent people's working group, and we worked with them to do a kind of insight report into the needs of neurodivergent people in Leeds. And we've done a bit of work with Live Well Leeds, who are a kind of a mental health service in Leeds, doing training and consultancy. Yes, Eli.
Just briefly, I just think with all these services around, I think I have a younger brother who's he's 13 and he's autistic, and I feel like with a lot of these services now that are developing, that he has a chance of having less trauma from services that I did, and that he hopefully will get support if he runs into, difficulties with his mental health. Hopefully, fingers crossed, things are getting better.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, we've AIM's got two projects. We've got the Mental Health Equity Project, which is nearly in its third year now, and the main aim of that project is to focus on improving autistic mental health peer support, staff training and equitable access to mental health services. And we do that in lots of ways. We're an advocacy organisation and we go to lots of meetings and advocate a lot for those changes. And and we do other things, like I mentioned before. Mental health can be holistic, so we do training for social prescribers, advocates and third centre mental health services. We're doing sensory audits, so we mentioned spaces earlier. We've done acute mental health wards. We're now looking at kind of like third sector or charity sector buildings where they might provide groups or therapy spaces. We run regular mental health focused peer support groups in partnership with Mind. They're online and in person, and we have lots of resources that we're co-producing with people to kind of some are available on our website. And we're just in the final processes of launching something called the Mental Health Access Project. Don't have enough time to explain the intricacies of that one, so keep an eye on our website for more details. But that's more kind of one-to-one work, so working people to access community mental health hubs, which are a new evolving thing, and that's through a kind of mix of self-advocacy, advocacy and peer support. We're kind of, again, providing some training alongside the diagnostic service and looking at, we mentioned kind of third sector, charity sector spaces, but looking at some of the therapeutic spaces within NHS. So, in conclusion, I won't try and read this out because I'm dyslexic and I'll musk it up, but I'll give it a go. So as we conclude this presentation on autism and mental health, let's focus on the journey towards equity. Significant strides have been made in improving support for autistic individuals, as seen in some of the things we've highlighted today. However, it's encouraging progress, but there remains a considerable distance to travel. Many autistic people still face substantial barriers in accessing the mental health services they need and deserve. So yeah, good progress, a long way to go, I think. And if you would like to contact the AIM team, here are our details, or you can go to our stall. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming to our talk.